We're about to begin. Colonel Angel.
All right, so yeah, it's definitely my honor. We've had a star-studded day with a lot of folks that have come and really kind of come in as guest speakers and really kind of hitting some different topics. And we have another one that's just about to join us right now too. And I'm personally really happy to be inviting Mr. Pat Kelleher up to the stage, particularly because of his time within the Marine Corps as well. So retired Marine Corps colonel who had command at multiple levels certainly as well. And then what I really want to point out is his path since leaving the Marine Corps as an active duty Marine, because this really kind of resonates for the particular topic that we're talking about here of global expeditionary logistics. So really kind of quickly going through this. So first job was working as essentially the Deputy Director for Logistics Division within LP. So thinking enterprise-wise for the Marine Corps. But then this gets a little bit more interesting. So he was on the Federal COVID-19 response team or Operation Warp Speed. Then next moved over to DLA. So many of you in this room probably do appreciate DLA. And I say it that way from the viewpoint that there are a lot of us in the Marine Corps who think, oh my God, DLA, I wish they just, but then when you see it from the other perspective of actually being within DLA and understanding the global presence and the enterprise presence and the role of DLA. So his job in DLA was as the Executive Director for Operations and Sustainment. And then most recently was the Principal Deputy Director for Strategic Logistics within the Joint Staff J4. So you're seeing how every single one of these jobs is really significant from the global logistics perspective. And then just recently moved into the job as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Material Readiness. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce Mr. Pat Kelleher.
No, thanks, Aaron. Hey, so I know I'm the last speaker, but I do want to thank the Association of Marine Corps Logisticians, Christopher Newport University, and Center for American Studies, and most importantly, you all for sticking around to the bitter end. I think we have a reception after this, so that'll be good. We can have our beverage of choice. That's right. Are they free?
Everybody has a drink card in their folder.
Oh. Okay, just one. All right, just one. If anybody doesn't want to use theirs, I'll. Hey, so first, I want to talk just a minute about the title of this, and I give you credit for keeping the word expeditionary logistics. I think that's very important. It's very important from the joint perspective and from the perspective of the Department of Defense, because not all services think about expeditionary logistics in the same way. And I say that really meaning the Marine Corps and the Army bring a different perspective to logistics and thinking about things in an expeditionary way that is very important to the joint force. And so in that sense, contested logistics is a subset, in my mind, of expeditionary logistics. So it really starts with our collective ability to deploy, employ, sustain, and then redeploy. And that is not an easy task and one that we shouldn't forget about. Let's go to the next slide, please. The other thing is, we've talked about contested logistics, and, it's not new. I'm not going to talk about it. Everybody knows what it is. But what I will tell you is if you don't think that we are in a contested environment right now today, I would offer you don't understand the environment that we're in, because we are being contested, we are being congested by our adversaries actively every single day, from CONUS, in CONUS, forward. And were we to have to deploy, it would be a significant challenge. So we know that we know what the challenge is. The question is, are we postured to fight and win against a peer adversary? And if not, what are we doing about it? And what I would say is, frankly speaking, and I've been fortunate to look at this problem from a lot of different angles over the last couple of years, and I would say we are not. We are not postured to fight and win against a peer adversary. We have a lot of work to do. From the perspective of the Joint Staff, the chairman makes strategic resource decisions about what he can and cannot provide one combatant command or another every day. There is simply not enough resources to go around. We cannot provide every combatant commander with everything that every combatant commander needs. And so we are making strategic choices about resource allocation between and among combatant commands. And we are not even an active belligerent in the fight. Well, to some degree. We are, bombing the Houthis, probably not enough. But, we're not actively fighting in Russia, against Russia. We're not necessarily an active belligerent, so to speak. But we're making resource choices between and among combatant commanders. I would tell you, a couple other little factoids. For the 30 days after October 7th, the United States, employed C-17s in excess of 100% capacity for about 30 days. So we do not have enough strategic airlift. We do not have enough strategic sea lift. We are about 10 million square feet short of the requirements to meet certain O plans. So, we have some challenges. I don't know if anybody has had the opportunity to read, there's a recent report, the Commission on the National Defense just came out, very sobering, does not paint an optimistic picture. It says, we were last prepared for a global conflict during the Cold War, and we are not prepared today. The U.S. industrial base is unable to meet the equipment, technology, and munition needs of the U.S. and our partners and allies. That is right now today. So when we talk about, General Poole talked about the historical context, and, where do you see yourself in, sort of the historical perspective relative to the periods before World War I, the periods before World War II, the periods, before Vietnam, and up into the future? I think that my thought is, we can almost think about ourselves as, a lot of people talk about, well, we're like in the period before World War II because, we're mobilizing, we're getting ready to mobilize, and a lot of that is true. A lot of that is true. But I would offer we might be in the period before Vietnam where we had preconceived notions about how we would fight an adversary, about what our adversary would do, about how the adversary would respond, and what we, the United States, needed to do strategically, operationally, and tactically to win a guerrilla conflict. And we did not adapt our perspectives to adjust to the changing environment. We simply took the model that worked in World War II and applied it to Vietnam. And I think that's particularly dangerous for logisticians because we are in large part victims of our own success. So if you think about the last 25 years where we, the United States, have dominated in 3 domains. We're now going to be challenged in 5. We are going to be contested in ways that we haven't been before. But because we have been able to succeed logistically, without exception, for the last 25 years, we have built a degree of complacency into the system, not by logisticians, but by planners and those who think about and execute operations. There is a built-in bias about logistics success, much like there was prior to Vietnam, where the American way of war would succeed anywhere. I think there is danger that operators who have been accustomed to logisticians making it happen regardless have false assumptions about the environment because the environment is going to be significantly different. General Poole talked about what it took to win, and simply put, it took mass. It took mass to win. We could generate mass. We had the luxury to spend months offloading and building supplies. We will not have that luxury in the future. We will fight, when we fight, for the first time against an adversary that will target us with precision munitions. We're seeing that now in some of what's happening in the Middle East. So we're not going to have the luxury to build the mass that produced the depth that enabled logisticians to solve whatever problem came our way. And so I think there's some complacency, and I see it in the Joint Staff. You all see it. Talk about war games. How much do we see the farewell? And so there we all were, ready to fight, and no one, how did we get there? What was the lift required to get there? How did we sustain it? How did we fight for 3 weeks when we only have, X number of munitions? The consumption planning rates, we talked about that earlier today, the consumption factors are wildly off. We are expending munitions and spare parts in ways that are not factored in by our consumption rate. So, I say that just to drive home the imperative. To drive home the imperative of the things that we have talked about today, to really put a fine point on, we have a lot of work to do. Now, with that said, there is some good stuff going on. If I could get the next slide. So I won't talk through all of this. I'll just hit a couple things topically. We've talked a lot about data. What I will tell you is that there is a very good partnership right now between OSD, the Joint Staff, and the CDAO office to build the data foundation necessary to enable decision-making at echelon and to apply artificial intelligence tools. That I am very optimistic about our ability to establish the data foundation, in the very near term. We are a month or two away, maybe, from having near real-time visibility of all Department of Defense inventory to the brigade level. So those gold tables are being developed right now. They are in Advana. Some of them aren't all gold, but that's okay. And it's a collaborative effort. It's Joint Staff, it's DLA, several combatant commands, service representatives. We are sucking in the gold tables that you all are producing in collaboration. The challenges, as we talked about today, getting them to be gold tables, that's okay. But that data foundation is being built. And it's going to be ready in the relatively near future because data and the ability to make decisions at speed is what is going to provide us the advantage that mass provided us in the past. So we'll continue to press on that. I do think that's a good news story, but we need to continue to press hard. I'm working with the CDAO office. We've got to push on things like ATO reciprocity. We're making progress there. Getting rid of the requirement, frankly, for data sharing and data use agreements between government organizations within the Department of Defense. I'm trying to make that my mission because that makes no sense to me why, I would need to do a data sharing agreement with, Transcom to share data. And then take 6 months to do it. So not super helpful. Honorable Lohman talked a little bit about the new metrics. It's super great reading. I really highly recommend 3110-05. It is really short, but it is going to be foundational in how we are going to build the data foundation on the readiness side as the flip side to the operational side of the coin, where we have visibility on inventory, visibility of readiness, and we are thinking about readiness in a different way. The chairman's going to change. Before I left the Joint Staff, the chairman, was talking about changing the paradigm and thinking and how we think about readiness. Honorable Lohman alluded to that. It's not going to be, just, how many tanks do I have up? What's the mission thread that gets me the readiness that I need to accomplish the mission that I need to accomplish, to achieve the effects on the objective that I need to accomplish, and what are the readiness implications of changing the force posture in an unplanned way? Because those are significant and not well factored in to global force management decisions, not because nobody wants to, but just because we don't have the good data foundation to enable us to do that. So data, I think we're making progress. Another thing I want to highlight that is, and General Poole alluded to logistics as a warfighting function. One of the things we got going on the Joint Staff is better fusing the logistics and intelligence warfighting functions such that the logistics community will benefit from intelligence in ways that we haven't before, not because that intelligence wasn't out there, but frankly because as logisticians, we weren't really asking the right questions. We weren't leveraging the intel community in the way that we could have or should have, arguably. So part of this is going to be education for logisticians on what are the questions you need to be asking, what intel is out there and available, and then the flip side, from an intelligence community, what products do they have, what products should they be developing? So we can do two things. One, logistics network defense. How do we protect ourselves against what we know the adversary is trying to do? And then number two, adversary logistics network attack. So logisticians informing the targeting cycle to attack the adversary kinetically or non-kinetically in different ways that impact their logistics. Just, some ways that we haven't really thought about it before. There is going to be a growing focus on the organizational industrial base. We alluded to that a little bit today. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the defense industrial base, insufficient production of munitions, of platforms, of spare parts, et cetera. Very aggressive approach. The organizational industrial base falls in my portfolio now. So going to be actively looking for recommendations as to how we can improve and leverage our organic manufacturing capability to improve readiness. How can we increase production at arsenals and munitions production? So it's not just fixing stuff in the depots, which is important because those also require capital improvement. So how are we synergizing that effort so that as a joint force we are developing capabilities in complement with commercial capabilities, and also understanding the trade-offs that we're making when we are not making investments. Like if I'm going to invest in this one over here, I'm not investing over here. And so those are the things that my office can help, that I envision my office will be able to help either advocate for you all for resources or to help make those risk decisions. I talked about readiness already. Again, we are going to change the paradigm and how the department thinks about readiness. It is going to be about material availability and operational availability and the driver trees that inform those metrics so that we can turn those into quantifiable measures to ask for additional resources or to understand the level of risk that we are taking as a department if we choose not to fund something. So if we know that we don't have the operational availability and we can track that because we need to invest in X and we choose not to invest in X, that's okay, as long as we understand what the implications of that are. And we can balance those decisions across the department in a way that we aren't doing at this point. Two things we haven't really talked about today that I'll just touch on very briefly, if only to highlight the things that are ongoing at the OSD level that you all should be aware of. Number one, supply chain risk management and the things that Honorable Lohman's team, specifically in the DASD Logistics office, is doing to establish a departmental-wide supply chain risk management program. It is not going to be prescriptive at all. Their initial intent is to develop or contract for IDIQ or blanket purchase agreement, whichever they're doing, a suite of software that then any user can choose from and use to illuminate their supply chain, to highlight the risks in the way that those risks need to be highlighted for them, and then to share that data back at the OSD level, apply some artificial intelligence in it so that we can begin to develop the connections between individual supply chain illuminations as they are executed by program managers across the department. That way we can benefit from each other's work, and frankly, it'll be a standard set of tools, and you won't have to go out and do your own contracting. You can just pick one of 8 or whatever the number is. So I think that's going to be very helpful. DASD Log is also driving a deliberate effort for vendor threat mitigation. In my mind, I think of supply chain risk management, vendor threat mitigation, sort of different sides of the same coin. But vendor, obviously, for as you all know, we talked about operational contracting support and the degree to which the joint force will need to rely on contracted resources, either in country or contracted resources that deploy with us. We've got to make sure we're contracting with the right folks. And so that's a very robust and aggressive effort as well. The last thing I'll talk about is allies and partners. There is a lot of talk about allies and partners, but I think we are making some progress in actual quantifiable integration of capabilities where we're starting to have, particularly within the framework, Honorable Lohman talked about the regional sustainment framework, like where can we send stuff to get repaired by a host nation company that can repair my widget instead of me having to send the widget back to the United States, or I can send it to a depot in Australia and that widget can get repaired there and I don't have to send it back to the United States. The other thing that is gaining momentum as part of the conversation about the industrial base is co-production, specifically with munitions. Very robust efforts to identify who can produce what so that we, the United States, don't have to produce it. Or we can capitalize on another country's capability to produce something more, better, faster than we can. And therefore, we can focus our production capacity on something they can't do. The only way we will be able to outproduce our adversaries is by leveraging the production capacity of our partners and allies in ways that we have never done before. And so it is very much a priority of the chairman, and there are already some good efforts ongoing at OSD. I think the challenge now is just integrating those efforts so that the demand signal coming from the joint staff is guiding the investment strategies that are being developed at the OSD level, so that that which is being invested at OSD actually matches. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it just hasn't. There's room for improvement, but matches the priorities of the joint force. So I think those are all good things. Those are all good things. Next slide. So, General Poole and I actually did not coordinate at all, but it's the same thing. We are not, as I said at the beginning, if you accept the hypothesis that we are not postured to fight and win, we need to think about things differently. And how are we doing it differently? And what are you all individually in your daily workspaces doing to move the needle? Because we do not have time. We do not have time. We do not have time to spend 5 or 6 years to get production to where it needs to be. We don't have time to produce all of the munitions that we think we need to produce. We have dug ourselves into a fairly large hole, and then when you layer on what arguably will be more accurate consumption rates, both for maintenance and munitions, that hole gets larger. So we have a long way to go. Really, everything that we do needs to be outcome-oriented, data-informed, measurable, and accessible. And I stole that from the vice chairman. He says that on a daily basis. But it is true. If you are not doing something that is specifically oriented on an outcome that will improve our ability to fight and win, then we need to think about what we are doing, because you probably shouldn't be doing it. We don't have time to do everything we need to do. Therefore, we must do the things we must do in order to enable us to fight and win. And, we spend a lot of time, there's a silo and everybody's, as General Poole said, send an email. Do the outreach on your own. The only reason that we are siloed, or the degree that we are siloed, is just a measure of how much individually each of us aren't getting out and figuring out what others are doing. I'm new to OSD, so I'm going to meet all the other DASDs and all the other ASDs. Like, what are you doing? Hey, we're working on that too. Oh, how about that? I had no idea. And that's okay, because everybody's doing what they're doing for all the right reasons. But we will gain synergy by, individually taking a more deliberate effort to do that outreach, to figure out what we need to do. And then the last thing I would ask, or what I would ask from you all, as you come across, as you are doing what you are doing, You will run into policy obstacles, and you'll run into, manuals that say, well, you can't do this or you can't do that. Well, let's change them. Between the Department of Defense and the Joint Staff, we own all the policy. So if there's a policy that's getting in the way of you all doing what you need to do to fight and win, let us know, we'll change it. Interim updates to policy are awesome because you don't really have to coordinate them with anybody. You just update the policy, and then I'll coordinate it when I make the policy change final. You do have to coordinate it, but it's a little bit easier when you're just calling it an interim update. And that's what we really need to be thinking about. How can we clear the obstacles? How can I help you all clear the obstacles that you encounter when you're trying to do the things that you need to do? And then help me advocate an honorable Lohman and his replacement. Help us advocate for you all on the things that the logistics community, that the sustainment community needs, that thus far, that to date have sort of consistently fallen below the cut line. We need to make sure that they aren't falling below the cut line, because this imperative, it's real, and we've got to be communicating that on a daily basis at echelon and injecting ourselves, yourselves, injecting yourself into the planning process so that logistics is not an afterthought, is an integral part of the plan from the beginning. And, if you walk out of a meeting and say, oh, the J4 wasn't tasked or whatever, that's like, well, what should you be doing? Why are you waiting for a task? Figure out what you need to do and do it. Inject yourself into the process, because we can't allow operators to make, big hand, little hand, big map. No, that's what we're going to do. No, we're not. But maybe with the proper incorporation of logistics on the front end, you can accomplish the objective faster, more effectively, more efficiently. So that's what I would ask of you all. And with that, I will pause for however many questions we have time for.
Sir, A.J. Manuel with Collins Aerospace and Raytheon Technologies. We get asked a lot by our military customers, can you surge? And unfortunately, the defining surge, service by service, they kind of stumble like, well, and then there's the money aspect. Yep. And so maybe you can help us say, from where you sit, how are you trying to help the services identify what is surge?
Right. No, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of times, in the department, we like to blame industry. Oh, they're not being supportive. The guy's hard to work with, whatever. But, I think it starts with us. We need to be better customers. We need to be better customers and clearer on what it is we need from industry. And when we say we need surge capacity, whatever that is, industry's not going to make any investments in developing surge capacity unless we pay for it. And so if we're going to think about things differently and we're going to get away from thinking about being efficient and being effective, okay, how about I give industry some money to invest in capacity that will not be used until I need it. But I pay for it every year. So I got to do maintenance on it, Now there's some other aspects of that, but you still have to have the workforce, you have to have a trained workforce, you have to have the raw materials, but you could jumpstart it. And so I think that's, I think across the spectrum of, when we talk about what do we need, we need to be able to surge, I think we need to think about what can the department do to make the investments up front in order to have that capacity available when we need it, even if you never need it. I mean, we're Marines. How much ammo do you need? More. How much capacity do I need? More. I mean, so pay for it. So we can pay for it. It's just, that's a very different mentality. It's frankly something that DLA did pretty good. They got contracts in place with 3M. Pay 3M, I'm making up numbers, $1 million a year. And in return for $1 million a year, 3M will provide 5 million masks. So DLA doesn't have to manage the inventory, don't have to manage the shelf life, don't have to manage stock rotation. But we might not need 5 million masks, but that's an investment in virtual capacity that is there when we need it, but it's not efficient. We just need to think about things differently. So I think, to your point, how do you define that requirement? I think that becomes a collaborative discussion that probably needs to take place at the joint staff or OSD level because no requirement is necessarily unique to a particular service. So aggregating those requirements, whatever they may be, I think would be helpful. And that's certainly something, that I will be thinking about going forward, particularly with capacity in the organic industrial base.
Hello, I'm Tim Getters, the National Director for Logistics Resilience with the EMP Task Force. We've worked up a public-private partnership model where we go across many disciplines: energy, communications, data, logistics, medical, whatever, and we bring those together in a way to triangulate around these obstructions that you're talking about and the inability to fund those things. So we look at ways to apply this technology for different sectors and then effectively have the capacity so that when we do have a national emergency or national disaster, there would be that surge capacity. But we still need support and help because as private groups, we're working out of our own pockets for the most part. So this is a welcome news to hear that there's General Pool is looking also for this private sector or industrial interest to participate in this model. So what would you recommend for former military that they've experienced the lack of enthusiasm in the acquisition process, let's call it,
Right.
and how to apply their talents respectively and work in this collaborative model, because it's sort of an all hands on deck scenario for emergency right now. So how would you approach that with just appealing to those people?
I think it's just, at this point, people like General Poole and I can drive it from the top down, but a grassroots effort from the bottom up that keeps the conversation going, that keeps the dialogue alive, that drives the idea across the enterprise, across organizations, is how we're going to make traction. And then we're going to have to, obviously build that into the budget cycle. But I think the challenge really is the hurdle at this point is to overcome, the efficiency, the emphasis on efficiency that we have lived with for the last 25 or 30 years, to really focus on effectiveness and making that part of the narrative and quantifying with partners how surge capacity or additional capacity can help readiness, can improve force posture, can improve global force management.
A quick question for you. I agree with everything you're saying. We are not
my
training.
job is done.
We're not, we're done. We're not training how we will fight, that's for sure. So what do you think about like a SEER school for logisticians? Like throw them into Mauritania, say I need 1,000 drones in 3 weeks. Build it on the ground, go. What do you think about a program like that like gets them out of their comfort zone, gets them using local resources, having to speak the language, having to deal with all the shit that's in that country? What do you think about that?
Can I go?
Yeah,
No.
I'll take it.
Okay. No, I think that's a good idea. I don't know what that would look like in practice. But I will tell you one thing that we are working on is, and it gets to your point about, what are the competencies of, for example, a field grade joint logistician? What do we want a field grade joint logistician to be able to do? Is it to go out to the field and be able to, print drones from dirt? Or is it, plan and coordinate a operational level distribution network? And so I don't know that we have a good common understanding of what we want joint logisticians to be able to do, because each of the services has their own training pipeline. As I talked about at the beginning, the Marine Corps and the Army, frankly, better at developing an expeditionary mindset through that curriculum. But at the same time, does that necessarily provide the joint qualifications that the joint force needs? So I think that could be debated. And so I think it's a good hypothesis to challenge the logistics education community to really cause us to define, what are the competencies of a joint logistician, a field grade joint logistician, a company grade joint logistician. I don't know that we have a good answer for that. And frankly, one of the outputs of, one of the war games, it was a command and control war game that the joint staff did. And, their, collective output was our joint logisticians are neither joint nor logisticians. So I think we got some work to do. I mean, and I say that facetiously. I mean, there's a lot of good education, but I'm not sure if it's integrated in the way that it could be to produce the kind of logistics officer, that we want, whatever that is. But certainly there could be a place in that continuum for that kind of thing. And then you could extrapolate that further and say, well, how about, for, being able to prepare a meal from the pig I, bought at the market kind of thing. And can my cooks do that? That kind of stuff. So those are good thoughts.
Lonnie McGee from 3MEF. Quick question. We're talking effectiveness and efficiency.
Yes.
From 3MEF, looking at effectiveness, one of the things that immediately becomes apparent is that effectiveness is a waste of money. And what I mean by that is we are going to put things in place that you are more than likely not going to use prior to it becoming defunct and basically becoming waste. Is there truly an appetite to do that? Because if not, then all we are going to continue to do, which is what we have been doing to date, is talk about a problem and not actually solve it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I will tell you that I talk about effectiveness versus efficiency all the time. And I think that more we do that as logisticians at Echelon, we need to drive that reality home. And I know that that's difficult for some organizations, particularly those that are sort of governed by working capital, because that's the antithesis of a working capital fund. Don't be effective, be as efficient as possible, regardless of the output or the outcomes. And so, I mean, yes, I would agree with you. If by being effective, we can develop an integrated sustainment network that contributes to integrated deterrence that precludes us from fighting a war, I'm all in. And that's the narrative that we need to continue to drive. It's just a significant paradigm shift. But I will tell you that there are, senior leaders, I've heard the DepSecDef talk about it, I've heard the chairman talk about it, I've heard the director of the J4 talk about it, I've heard the J3 talk about it. That these are the kinds of things, when we talk about thinking differently, collectively, this is how we can drive to get that thinking differently to achieve quantifiable outputs. And if we want later, I can give you, there are some specific projects that, that we are working on that are absolutely designed not to be efficient. But that's just what we, and then the flip side is, even if they aren't funded, we then have informed the degree of risk that, ultimately the chairman or the secretary are assuming because we are choosing not to invest in something and we've clearly articulated why it is a requirement, whatever it is, and what it means for us, the joint force, not to have it. And so I think that's the flip side, because sometimes logisticians maybe don't do as good a job articulating, I just need more parts. Okay, but why? Give me the data, show me the analysis, walk everybody down the logic path so it's incontrovertible, and then that informs a better perhaps risk decision than we have been making in the past. But yeah, it's a challenge. I agree. All right. Thank you all very much.